Today, we are exploring a masterpiece of historical writing that changes the way we look at leadership, especially during a time when the very fabric of a nation was tearing apart. We are going to walk through the world of the 16th President of the United States, but perhaps not in the way you have seen him in textbooks. The main purpose of this book is to pull back the curtain on the political genius of Abraham Lincoln. We often think of him as a somber, solitary figure, but the reality is that he was a master of people. He possessed a unique kind of strength that allowed him to surround himself with his harshest critics and most ambitious rivals, all for the sake of a higher cause. As we journey through the insights of Doris Kearns Goodwin, we begin to see that Lincoln's greatness wasn't just in his speeches or his policies, but in his profound emotional intelligence. There are a few high-level ideas that we will be looking at today. First, we will explore the idea of magnanimity in leadership. This is the concept that a true leader doesn't need to crush their enemies. Instead, they can win them over and use their talents to strengthen the whole. Second, we will look at the importance of strategic patience. Lincoln knew that the right move made at the wrong time could be a disaster, and his ability to wait for the public mood to shift was a key part of his success. Finally, we will consider the idea that a leader's character is their greatest political asset. In a world of ego and ambition, it was Lincoln's humility and his ability to share credit that ultimately saved the Union. It is a fascinating look at how one man managed the massive egos of the most powerful politicians of his day to achieve something that seemed impossible. I am so glad you've joined me for this deep dive into a pivotal moment in history. Before we get started with a full summary, if you enjoy this kind of historical exploration, please take a moment to like this audio, share it with someone who loves history, and subscribe so you don't miss our future journeys into the lives of great leaders. The audacity of the cabinet selection. The first core concept we must understand from this work is the sheer audacity of how Lincoln formed his government. After winning the Republican nomination in 1860, Lincoln did something that shocked the political establishment of the time. Instead of filling his cabinet with loyalists and friends who would always agree with him, he chose to appoint the very men he had just defeated. These were men like William H. Seward, Salmon P. Chase, and Edward Bates. Men who were more famous, more educated, and, in their own minds, far more qualified to be president than the prairie lawyer from Illinois. This idea is critical because it reveals Lincoln's supreme self-confidence. He wasn't afraid of being outshone by the big men of his party. He understood that the country was facing an existential crisis and that the government needed the best minds available, regardless of their personal feelings toward him. By bringing these rivals into his inner circle, he effectively neutralized them as outside threats. He turned potential leaders of an opposition into colleagues, who were now personally invested in the success of his administration. The importance of this move cannot be overstated. It created a team of rivals that represented every wing of the Republican Party, from the most radical abolitionists to the most conservative border state thinkers. This diversity meant that every major decision was vetted by people with wildly different perspectives. While this often led to heated arguments and internal friction, it ensured that Lincoln was never operating in an echo chamber. For example, by bringing a man like Seward, who initially looked down on Lincoln, into the State Department, Lincoln eventually gained a devoted friend and a brilliant diplomat who helped keep European powers from intervening in the Civil War. Lincoln's ability to overlook past insults for the sake of future stability is the bedrock of his political genius. Now we move to the next point, which explores the specific internal qualities that allowed Lincoln to manage these volatile personalities once they were all in the same room. Emotional intelligence and the management of ego. The second core point of the book focuses on Lincoln's extraordinary emotional intelligence. Having a room full of rivals is one thing, but keeping them from tearing each other apart is quite another. Lincoln's leadership style was defined by a complete lack of personal vanity. He understood that in politics, and especially in a cabinet full of ambitious men, ego is often the greatest obstacle to progress. This concept is important because it shows that Lincoln didn't lead through command and control, but through empathy and persuasion. He was a master at reading people. He knew when to use a humorous story to diffuse a tense situation and when to remain silent and let others vent their frustrations. He frequently took the blame for the failures of his subordinates while giving them full credit for their successes. This wasn't just about being nice, it was a calculated and brilliant way to build loyalty. When his Treasury Secretary, Salmon P. Chase, continually undermined him or tried to maneuver for the presidency himself, Lincoln remained patient. He recognized Chase's brilliance at managing the nation's finances and decided that the country's need for a stable economy outweighed his own need for personal respect. This highlights a vital lesson from the book. A leader's strength is often found in their ability to absorb the anger and insecurities of others without reacting in kind. Lincoln's thick skin allowed him to keep the machinery of government running while his cabinet members were busy feuding with one another. He acted as the steady center of a spinning wheel. For instance, when Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War, would famously lose his temper or speak rudely to the president, Lincoln would often just wait for the storm to pass, knowing that Stanton's organizational energy was indispensable to the war effort. He prioritized the mission over his own feelings every single time. Now we move to the next point, which looks at how Lincoln used his communication skills to bridge the gap between his complex political maneuvers and the hearts of the American people. Mastery of public sentiment and strategic timing. The third core point from the book is Lincoln's profound understanding of public sentiment. He famously said that with public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. This idea is about more than just being popular. It's about a leader's ability to sense the rhythm of the people and wait for the precise moment when the public is ready to accept a radical change. This is incredibly important because it explains why Lincoln often seemed slow to his more radical contemporaries. To those who wanted immediate emancipation of the slaves at the start of the war, Lincoln appeared hesitant. However, the book clarifies that Lincoln was actually being a master strategist. He knew that if he moved too fast, he would lose the support of the border states and the more conservative members of the North, which would have ended the war and the hope of union immediately. He waited until the casualties of the war and the changing political climate made emancipation not just a moral necessity, but a military and political one. His genius lay in his ability to use his words to educate the public. He didn't just issue decrees. He explained his reasoning through letters and speeches that were designed to be read aloud in households across the country. He used simple language, metaphors, and clear logic to make complex issues understandable to the average citizen. This created a bond of trust between the leader and the led. When he finally issued the Emancipation Proclamation, he had laid so much groundwork that it felt like an inevitable step rather than a sudden shock. This mastery of timing ensured that the most controversial act of his presidency actually served to strengthen the Union's resolve rather than shatter it. The transformation of Lincoln's most formidable rival into his most indispensable ally is a central theme of the book, illustrating how his leadership style could actually change the hearts of those around him. This brings us to a closer look at William H. Seward, the man who was widely expected to win the Republican nomination in 1860. Seward was a sophisticated, wealthy, and highly experienced senator from New York who viewed Lincoln as a political amateur. When he eventually joined Lincoln's cabinet as Secretary of State, he did so with the belief that he would be the power behind the throne, effectively running the country while the backwoods president handled the ceremonial duties. This concept is essential because it demonstrates Lincoln's ability to win people over through sheer character and competence. In the early months of the administration, Seward actually sent Lincoln a memorandum essentially suggesting that the president had no policy and that he, Seward, should take the lead on all major decisions. A lesser leader would have been insulted or might have fired Seward on the spot. Instead, Lincoln responded with a quiet but firm authority, making it clear that while he valued Seward's advice, he alone would be the one making the final calls. Over time, Seward's initial condescension turned into profound respect and eventually a deep, brotherly love. He realized that Lincoln possessed a natural greatness that far exceeded his own. This transition from rival to partner was a turning point for the Union. Seward became Lincoln's sounding board, his most loyal defender, and the man who helped manage the complex international relations that kept the Confederacy from gaining European recognition. The book shows that Lincoln didn't just manage his rivals, he redeemed them, turning their ambition into a shared sense of duty. For example, by the end of Lincoln's first term, Seward was no longer looking for ways to surpass the president, but was instead dedicated to ensuring Lincoln's legacy was preserved. Now we move to the next point, which looks at the opposite end of the spectrum. How Lincoln managed Salmon P. Chase, a rival whose ambition was never fully tamed, yet whose talents were too great to ignore. The discipline of utility over personal comfort. While William H. Seward became a devoted friend, Salmon P. Chase, the Secretary of the Treasury, remained a constant source of friction and political maneuvering. Chase was a man of immense intellect and high moral standing, particularly on the issue of abolition, but he was also consumed by a restless ambition to be president himself. Throughout his time in the cabinet, he used his position to build a political base for a future run against Lincoln, often criticizing the president behind his back and undermining his authority with members of Congress. This idea is important because it highlights Lincoln's utilitarian approach to leadership. He was willing to endure incredible personal disrespect and political backstabbing as long as the person doing it was doing their job effectively for the country. Lincoln knew that the nation's credit was fragile and that Chase was the best man to manage the complex task of funding a massive war. He essentially decided that his own comfort and ego were secondary to the stability of the national economy. This core point from the book teaches us about the burden of command. Lincoln famously kept Chase's repeated letters of resignation in his desk, refusing to accept them until the most critical financial hurdles of the war had been cleared. He tolerated Chase's arrogance and his constant presidential fever because he prioritized the institution over the individual. It wasn't until Chase's behavior became a genuine threat to the unity of the administration that Lincoln finally accepted his resignation. Even then, in a move that illustrates Lincoln's total lack of malice, he later appointed Chase to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He believed that despite Chase's personal flaws, his legal mind was what the country needed for the challenges of Reconstruction. This act of placing a rival in a lifetime position of power is one of the most striking examples of Lincoln's commitment to the greater good over personal grievance. Now we move to the next point, which shifts our focus from the cabinet room to the heavy weight of the war itself, exploring how Lincoln navigated the intersection of military failure and political survival. The weight of command and the evolution of the commander-in-chief. A major thread throughout the book is Lincoln's painful and often lonely journey to becoming an effective commander-in-chief. Unlike many of his rivals, Lincoln had very little military experience. He faced a series of generals, most notably George McClellan, who treated him with open contempt. McClellan famously called the president a well-meaning baboon and frequently ignored his direct orders. This section of the book illustrates the agonizing patience Lincoln had to exercise while the Union Army suffered defeat after defeat in the early years of the war. This point is critical because it shows that Lincoln's political genius extended to his role as a military leader. He didn't just defer to the experts, he spent countless nights in the Library of Congress and the War Department, teaching himself military strategy. He understood, perhaps better than his generals, that the war could not be won simply by capturing territory. He realized it was a war of exhaustion that required the total destruction of the Confederate armies. His struggle was to find a general who shared this vision and had the will to carry it out. The importance of this narrative lies in the emotional toll it took on Lincoln. The book details how he would walk the halls of the White House at night, unable to sleep, haunted by the casualty lists. Yet, despite the immense pressure from his cabinet and the public to fire failing generals or change course, he remained steady. He allowed his generals the time to prove themselves, and when they failed, he took the responsibility upon himself. His eventual discovery of Ulysses S. Grant and William T. Sherman wasn't just luck. It was the result of his persistent, disciplined search for leaders who could match his own resolve. For instance, when others complained about Grant's personal habits, Lincoln's response was famously focused on the result. "I can't spare this man, he fights." This laser focus on the ultimate goal, the preservation of the Union, allowed him to filter out the noise of gossip and focus on the traits that actually won battles. Now we move to the next point, where we see how Lincoln's leadership culminated in his vision for a lasting peace and the moral transformation of the nation. The moral pivot, from union to universal freedom. The final core concept we'll examine is the evolution of the war's purpose in Lincoln's mind and how he navigated the political minefield of the 13th Amendment. While the war began as a struggle to preserve the Union, The book illustrates how Lincoln gradually moved the nation toward the higher goal of total emancipation. This wasn't just a shift in policy, it was a shift in the American soul, and Lincoln was the primary architect of that transformation. This idea is profoundly important because it shows Lincoln at his most politically calculated and morally courageous. As the war drew to a close, he knew that the Emancipation Proclamation, which was an executive order based on military necessity, might not survive a legal challenge after the fighting stopped. He became obsessed with passing a constitutional amendment to abolish slavery forever. The book provides a detailed, almost behind-the-scenes look at how Lincoln used every ounce of his political capital and every trick in the book to secure the necessary votes in a divided Congress. The significance of this point is that it debunks the myth of Lincoln as a passive great emancipator. Instead, it shows him as a master of the grind of politics. He met with individual congressmen, used patronage, and exerted immense personal pressure to move the 13th Amendment forward. He understood that the window of opportunity was closing. His vision for the post-war world was one of reconciliation, famously expressed in his second inaugural address, "With malice toward none, with charity for all." He wanted to bring the South back into the fold not as a conquered province, but as a partner in a new, free America. This point highlights that his genius was not just in winning the war, but in preparing the ground for a peace that would actually last. He was looking decades, even centuries, ahead, ensuring that the sacrifices of the war would result in a fundamentally more just nation. The crucible of the 1864 election and political survival. As we move deeper into the story, we encounter a period where Lincoln's political survival was at its most precarious. It is easy, in hindsight, to see Lincoln's second term as inevitable, but the book vividly illustrates that in the summer of 1864, Lincoln himself was convinced he would lose. The war had dragged on for 3 grueling years, casualties were mounting to staggering heights under General Grant's Overland campaign, and the Northern public was weary, angry, and deeply divided. This core point highlights Lincoln's unwavering commitment to the democratic process, even when it seemed destined to destroy him. While many of his advisors suggested he should postpone the election or use his military power to ensure a victory, Lincoln refused. He believed that if the rebellion could force the suspension of a national election, the rebellion had already won by destroying the essence of the Union. His genius here was not in a clever political trick, but in a profound moral consistency. One of the most powerful moments described by Goodwin is Lincoln's blind memorandum. In August 1864, believing he would be defeated by the Democratic candidate, George McClellan, Lincoln wrote a pledge stating that if he lost, he would cooperate with the president-elect to save the Union between the election and the inauguration, as the successor would have been elected on a platform that would make saving the Union impossible afterward. He had his cabinet members sign the back of the folded paper without knowing what was inside. This act of self-sacrifice, putting the country's survival above his own party's power, is a hallmark of his character. It shows that his leadership was never about personal glory, but about the preservation of a democratic ideal. When the fall of Atlanta finally shifted public sentiment in his favor, his victory was seen not just as a personal win, but as a mandate for his policies of total war and total emancipation. Now we move to the next point, where we step away from the battlefield and the halls of Congress to look at the domestic and social world that surrounded these men, and how those personal lives shaped the political landscape. The social web, wives, rivals, and the human cost of power. A unique strength of this narrative is how it brings to life the social and domestic spheres of the team of rivals. The political battles of the 1860s weren't just fought in the cabinet room, they were fought in the parlors and at the dinner tables of Washington, D.C. The book places a significant focus on the wives and families of these men, particularly Mary Lincoln, Frances Seward, and the ambitious Kate Chase, showing how their personalities and rivalries often mirrored or complicated the political alliances of their husbands. This concept is important because it humanizes the history. It shows that these leaders were not just cold political machines, but men who were deeply influenced by their home lives and personal tragedies. For example, the rivalry between Mary Lincoln and Kate Chase, Salmon Chase's daughter, was legendary. Kate Chase acted as her father's political manager, using her social brilliance to position him for the presidency, which often put her at odds with Mary Lincoln, who felt the weight of being an outsider in Washington's high society. The book also explores the shared burden of grief. Both the Lincolns and the Sewards suffered the loss of children during these years. The death of Willie Lincoln in the White House was a devastating blow that nearly broke the president, yet he had to continue leading a nation through its own mourning. These personal details are not just flavor, they explain the bonds of empathy that eventually formed between the men. When William Seward's wife, Frances, lived mostly in New York due to her health and her own radical abolitionist views, it created a sense of loneliness in Seward that drew him closer to Lincoln's company. This human-like connection allowed for a level of trust that survived the most heated political disagreements. It reminds us that history is made by people with hearts as well as minds. Now we move to the next point, which explores Lincoln's final vision for the nation as the war drew to a close and the daunting task of reconstruction began. The vision of reconciliation and the second inaugural. The final major theme we must consider is the evolution of Lincoln's philosophy regarding the post-war South. As the Union victory became certain, the question shifted from "how do we win?" to "how do we live together again?" The book highlights Lincoln's struggle against the radical Republicans in his own party, who wanted to treat the South as a conquered territory and punish its leaders. This idea is critical because it showcases Lincoln's ability to look past the bitterness of the moment toward the long-term health of the country. He knew that a peace based on revenge would only plant the seeds for future conflict. His approach was defined by magnanimity, a word that appears throughout the book to describe his spirit. He wanted to make it as easy as possible for the Southern states to return to the Union, provided they accepted the end of slavery. The importance of this vision is perfectly captured in his second inaugural address. Instead of a triumphalist speech celebrating the North's victory, Lincoln delivered a theological and deeply humble reflection on the war. He suggested that the war was a divine punishment visited upon both North and South for the offense of slavery. By spreading the blame, he sought to lower the temperature of the nation's anger. His visit to the fallen Confederate capital of Richmond shortly before his death further illustrated this. Rather than entering as a conqueror, he walked the streets almost unguarded, sitting in Jefferson Davis's chair not in triumph, but in quiet reflection. He told the military governors to let him up easy. This core point from the book demonstrates that Lincoln's greatest political genius was his realization that the only way to truly defeat an enemy was to turn them back into a fellow citizen. As we draw our journey to a close, we are left with the image of a man who was far more than just a martyr or a face on a mountain. Through the eyes of Doris Kearns Goodwin, we see Abraham Lincoln as a tireless worker and a brilliant psychologist who understood the mechanics of the human soul as well as he understood the law. The tragic irony of Lincoln's story is that he was taken at the very moment his team of rivals had finally become a cohesive, loyal unit. The assassination at Ford's Theater didn't just end a life. It disrupted a delicate balance of power that Lincoln had spent 4 years perfecting. The ultimate lesson of this history is that true power does not come from the ability to dominate, but from the ability to include. Lincoln's genius was his realization that a leader's greatest strength lies in their capacity for empathy and their willingness to share the stage with those who might disagree with them. He turned his competitors into his closest confidants, not through trickery, but through a genuine respect for their talents and a shared devotion to a cause larger than any one man's ambition. When we look back at the members of his cabinet, we see the profound impact he had on them. William Seward, once his most condescending critic, became the man who sat by his bedside in his final hours, broken with grief. Even Salmon P. Chase and the stern Edwin Stanton were fundamentally changed by their association with him. Stanton's famous words as Lincoln passed, "Now he belongs to the ages," were a testament to the fact that Lincoln had successfully navigated the greatest storm in American history. Lincoln left behind a blueprint for leadership that remains as relevant today as it was in 1865. He showed us that humility is not a weakness, but a tool for clarity. He proved that a leader can be both firm in their principles and flexible in their tactics. Most importantly, he demonstrated that even in a time of total war and bitter division, it is possible to lead with a heart that remains open to the better angels of our nature. Thank you for spending this time exploring the life and the mind of one of history's most remarkable figures. His story is a reminder that while the challenges we face may change, the qualities of great leadership, patience, empathy, and an unshakable commitment to the truth remain eternal. It has been a privilege to share these insights with you, and I look forward to our next historical journey together.